Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Good evening, folks. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Been a couple of weeks now since we last spoke. I'm sorry about last weekend. There was technical and other issues that made it impossible for us to regrettably bring a show to you, but we're working on that. One of those issues, I should actually say, is that we need to get certain equipment. We're running about trying to get equipment and do things that we want to do to be able to do those live shows. And that's why we don't do crowdfunders, never have, and I never will. And that's why we've got this merchandise. And some people have been already purchasing some merchandise. And all the profits that come from the merchandise will go towards getting us proper sound equipment, some software that we require, and a damn good video camera. So then we'll be ready. And then all you've got to do is invite us to your LACU, your branch, your Yes group, whatever, and we will bring Prism to you. And it's all got to be done, and it takes costs. And so that's why we're selling merchandise. So you get in touch, we'll get you some merchandise. We've got mugs, we've got T-shirts, we've got the polo shirts, we've got the baseball hats, and that'll help us get on the road, because I think in the coming 12 months, as I think tonight will reveal, we're going to be needing it. We're going to be doing everything. Things are going to pick up. I am enjoyed, techie, to remind me, you hit the like button, the subscribe button if you're enjoying this. But to help me to discuss things this week, I'm delighted to say I am joined by, down there in the borders, Yvonne Ridley.
Hi, Roddy.
Hello, Yvonne, my dear friend. How are you?
Great.
It's been a week since I last saw you.
Yes. Yes.
Nice to see you again.
In Perth.
Yes, in Perth. And also there, up in Clackmannan, we have our Eva Comrie.
Hi, Roddy. How are you?
I'm well, and you, my friend?
I've been doing my Christmas shopping. See if you can guess what these are for.
A wee pair of slippers, Len. See, first viewer who can guess who the slippers are for. You're naughty. And we're also delighted to say that our man, the Coatbridge Cavalier, is, as we're doing this, is in mid-air in Tokyo. We're joined by Allan Petrie. Well, Mr. Coatbridge Cavalier enjoys a business class flight to Tokyo on his way back to the UK for Coatbridge Christmas. Hey, Allan, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Nice to see you again. How are you?
Hi, thank you, Roddy. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing quite good, although it's quite cold here in Dundee.
Well, it was pretty cold there. I mean, last week was really cold. I mean, that was for the time of year as well. Hell of a cold. But it's been a heck of a week. We've got lots to talk about. But, we could talk about our fabulous weekend, which was fabulous. And Kenny and Alec and Neil and all the other speakers were on fire. But the big talking point, Yvonne, this week has got to be, well, I'm going to refer to it as the capitulation, where finally John Swinney admitted on behalf of the SNP there will be no referendum. It hasn't come as a shock to many of us, but it's still a sadness.
Well, I don't think it's really come as a surprise to any of the Prism panelists, because we've been forecasting this for months now, and I don't think any one of us will take any comfort out of saying, I told you so. We were right. God, I wished we'd been wrong. I wish that people were slagging us off on Twitter now, saying you got it totally wrong. You were way off. Of course, the SNP was always going to deliver. And my heart really goes out to all the people in the SNP who must be feeling like we're feeling today. We heard some of them in Perth who came along to our conference and received a very warm reception. Mm-hmm. And I hope we see them again at the second part of the conference in January in Edinburgh. They're really decent people, and they just want what we want. But they've been let down by a rotten, lousy leadership. And, I feel quite angry and sad at the same time. It's a roller coaster of emotions. And we knew that this was going nowhere from the day it was launched. And they've dragged us out on this roller coaster of emotions. I'm just thinking of, down in the borders, we have delivered hundreds, in fact, thousands of the wee Alapa book to get people geared up and get them in the starting blocks and get them thinking positively about independence. And people have been up and down the country from the Alapa Party, nationwide, getting people to talk about independence and get enthusiastic about it, try and change the no voters and bring the undecided off the fence. And I just, while it's been great meeting all these people and converting them to our cause, it's like watching the World Cup and then being told, oh, the final's been cancelled. It's what was it all about?
Yeah, it's a good question. Eva, I know you weren't surprised either. But where did the SNP go from here? Because they only had the one route, and no matter how much like people like Angus Brendan tried to get, and Chris when he was in the SNP tried to get a plan B discussed, there is nowhere for them to go.
It's like watching The Wizard of Oz and waiting for the curtain to be drawn back and see who it is behind it. There's nothing there. There's no substance. There's no fire in the belly. As Alex Salmond said, they're running up the white flag when people wanted to hear the lion rampant roar. It's just so unacceptable. Yes, it's sitting at 56% in the polls. And what do we have? We don't have a democratic event, an electoral event, so that we can convert that support into reality. What we've got instead is more of these. Another couple of years and another mandate seems to be the position. But if you rewind just a few months to when the First Minister made the grand announcement that there would be a referendum in October next year, she wasn't saying ifs or buts. She was saying no ifs, no buts. There will be a referendum. She wants it to be a legal one. If that doesn't happen, the next general election will be a plebiscite. She's rolling back on that now too. She's run out of road. She has nothing to offer the independence movement other than empty promises. She has no strategy. She has no specific proposals. We're all supposed to be invested in her secret plan. Instead, what we've got with Alba is, as Yvonne has said, 41 wee Alba book events on the tour this year. I was involved in speaking in 4 of them. I attended a few others. The general public are highly enthusiastic about independence. They want to see things happening. They want action. They want vitality. What they do not want is John Swinney as the Deputy First Minister or Nicola Sturgeon as the First Minister surrendering to Westminster's will. What we need is the Constitutional Convention, which was promised almost 3 years ago. Nicola Sturgeon promised us that. She has to deliver it. That is the way forward. Now, the good thing is we had the Alba event last Saturday. We've got another one in the middle of January. We're the party who are going places. We're listening to people. We're taking soundings. We are reacting. And we understand that Scotland wants to be on the move. But at the moment, we're stuck. We're on the hard shoulder because neither the First Minister nor others within the leadership of the Scottish Government have got the guts, the common sense, the plan or the strategy to drive this country forwards. In the meantime, it's freezing in Scotland. There's 2 inches of snow here today. I'm lucky. I've got a coal fire in my house. I can afford to set the gas up high. I don't have to worry about my bills. I'm in a pretty luxurious position compared to most of the people of Scotland. And in the real world, Scottish people are starving. They are freezing. They are worried about the bills. They are worried about Christmas. They don't know what next year's going to bring. They're looking at inflation, stagflation, prices rising all over the place. Our needs are great. Our potential is enormous, but our government are letting us down at every turn, and it cannot be tolerated. It just cannot be accepted.
No, Alan, my other great passion in life, apart from family, obviously, is politics, is football. Now, when a football manager fails, no matter what his previous record was, a few bad results and they're gone. Nicola Sturgeon put everything she had into this gold standard Section 30 legal referendum, nothing else. That's now failed. Is her time up? Or can she recover from this, Alan?
Well, I mean, at the Alba event, an SNP member mentioned the football connotation, saying Alba has the best strikers and they're scoring the goals just now. But what he didn't say was the SNP were playing left back. Unfortunately, that was left back in the changing room because they've not entered the pitch yet. I mean, if we look back to Wednesday, we had the new leader of Westminster at his last stand, if you like, playing General Custer, which he lost. We even had Kenny McCaskill coming in as the cavalry, showing them the way forward, and they all sat there stone-faced, except for John Nicholson, who turned around and said, but the support for independence is high in the polls. It could be 100% in the polls. If we've no way to get there, it doesn't matter. It's wasted. Now, what also annoys me is the way the SNP are using the poorest in society to justify them giving away this £20 million, saying it's going to go on to helping people heat their homes. £20 million. That's what, £4 a head. That's not going to go very far in Scotland. If they want to help people with the poorest in society heat their homes, go into the budget they have for the trans ideology. Then we'll be able to help people heat their homes. But what we need is this money put back in place for independence, because we have to stop mitigating Tory party policies from Westminster and start getting independence for our country, because that is the only way we will help the people of Scotland.
Yeah, Alan's touched on it there, Yvonne. What actually happened since the Supreme Court ruling? The Tories have been banging on, as have the Liberals and the Labour. All the House Jock parties have been banging on, this 20 million, it's a waste of money at this time, blah, 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 we shouldn't do it. And they crumbled. They crumbled. Now, we in the independence movement have been shouting at the SNP for years to move on independence, to get us a referendum, to give us a constitutional convention. They ignore us. But at the first sign of any pressure from the unionists, they crumbled. And as Alan says, 20 million, that's, to us and to the people listening, 20 million would be nice in our bank. But in the big scheme of things, it doesn't make a dent. It doesn't. It's like a midgie on an elephant's bum.
Well, Liz Truss could spend that in a nanosecond, let's face it. But it's, I'm a keen people watcher, and my favourite TV, and this sounds very sad, my favourite TV is watching Westminster and the antics in Westminster. And when the SNP 45 were originally arrived in Westminster, there was a real buzz, and they were sitting there loud and proud, and it was fascinating to see all the characters, including Angry Phil, who's joining the Mile High Club as we talk at the moment, probably, who knows. But anyway, watching the SNP now, it's just so underwhelming. They're sitting there with faces like smacked backsides, and they're not even united. Poor Joanna Cherry. you'd think she had scarlet fever because nobody sits next to her. She's sitting on these cramped green benches and she's, you know, she can swing a cat. Nobody will sit close up to her. They don't talk to each other. They're in these little cabals sniping against each other. And they are the most miserable, unhappy people in that house. Mind you, I mean, they have to sit opposite the Tories day in and day out. So that can't be very uplifting. But you just have to watch the body language. They're disunited, they're backstabbing, they are what Labour was under Corbyn. Betrayers, full of treachery, not thinking about the people who voted them in there to build an escape tunnel and get the hell out. It's you know, you just have to look at the body language. And then there's our Kenny and Neil, you know, and standing up and making speeches and with passion, with fire in their belly. And what are the others thinking? You know, when these proud Scots get up on their feet and they talk from the heart with real passion, representing the people who voted them into power. I don't know. It's just, gosh. I think Prism viewers are going to have to take a couple of Mogadon before they switch on today, because it is going to be quite a depressing show.
Well, I don't know. John Nicholson, your MP, Eva, interrupted Kenny's speech and was allowed to. And, you know, he said, but, you know, look at the polls, implying that the whole Supreme Court thing had been the secret plan to get the polls up. I mean, it's a load of nonsense. And they were quick to send back the £20 million, Eva. But what about the 600k that was set aside for an independence referendum?
Oh.
Will that begin unwoven out of the accounts and sent back to all the people that donated?
The mind really does boggle at times, Roddy. You'll remember that on Wednesday night was the debate in the House of Commons on the SNP motion, which was to do with trying to get onto the order paper for the House of Commons in January, an argument in respect of persuading Westminster to authorise a Scottish independence referendum. Mm-hmm. So the debate really only involved short speeches from SNP members and an absolute barnstormer from Kenny, which is the one to which you refer and where John Nicholson interrupted him. But John just really managed, not for the first time in his political career, to make a bit of a fool of himself, because he only drew attention to the inaction and the ineptitude and the failure of the SNP to deliver on the raison d'etre and on the promises and the repeated mandates. So, no, I don't think that it's likely that the SNP will deliver terribly much for Scotland in the foreseeable future. They don't enjoy navel-gazing, they are not accountable, and they don't like answering awkward questions such as, where is the £600,000 and what's the story with this 100-odd grand that the First Minister's husband has contributed or lent to the party? However, perhaps from a Scottish perspective, a more important consideration would be to establish why it was that on Wednesday night in Westminster, the SNP were arguing, in effect, for a Section 30 for a referendum, and yet, less than 24 hours later in Holyrood, the SNP-led Scottish Government was ditching the plan for a referendum and reallocating the budget. I'd have thought, as Allan said earlier, that a far more sensible use of that money would have been to ramp up the campaign for independence and to begin to allocate perhaps some of that funding to the Independence Convention as previously promised. Because in the absence of reactivating the independence campaign, and with the obvious difficulties that remain for the SNP internally regarding financial matters, the cynic might begin to conclude, or at least to wonder, what the purpose of the SNP today actually is. Because it's looking awful like it's a job about keeping people in jobs and not delivering for the people who elected them on innumerable mandates.
Mm-hmm. But here's the question. You brought it up there about Mr. Murrell's lending the party £160,000. They get £1.2 million of short money a year from Westminster. There's this 600k that's vanished. They tell us they've got 115,000 members. So where's the money going? If we've not been campaigning for independence, where's all the money going?
Keeping a lot of people in jobs, isn't it? You know, it's I suppose press officers and media officers who will be watching this broadcast. They'll be trawling through our social media output. They'll be looking at our tweets. They'll be deciding whether or not to retweet us and call us horrible names. And they'll be looking at promoting policies that are subsidiary or secondary to independence. Where it's not going is where it's supposed to go, which is the independence campaign. I can't remember the numbers, but you'll recall that somebody did a Freedom of Information request to establish how many folk were working on independence over the course of the last couple of years, and the result was actually laughable, but also pitiful. They've lost their way. There's no two ways about it. And how they remain as popular as they are beats me. I think it's just the First Minister seems to come out with sound bites that people appear to grasp onto, because they seem to think that if you vote SNP, then suddenly one day somehow there will be an event that leads to independence.
Well, for 50 years, even they voted Labour thinking that socialism was going to come and equality was going to come. Scottish people, I think you've alluded to it, and I do as well. We're not too poor, we're not too weak. Maybe we're just too stupid. Maybe we are. Allan, I read it in an article today was the point that with the frustration that nothing was happening, we had 8 years of absolutely nothing happening since the referendum in 2014, and suddenly political parties like ALPA, like ISP, like the other two that sprung up in the last elections. We had we've got the SSRG, we've got Salva, all popping up, and everyone going in different directions. Everyone looking for a way to get independence because there's no lead. But there is the only way I can see is what's been put out at our conference, did I say, which was open to all at the weekend, which is call a constitutional convention, call all elected members of Parliament, members of the Scottish Parliament, members of the Westminster Parliament, council leaders, Civic Scotland, trade union leaders, and come up with a route and a plan that they can all get behind. There is no other way. Westminster's closed down all the other routes, or am I missing something?
No, I mean, you're quite right. I mean, I've got to say, I feel very, very sorry for the vast majority of SNP members, because they're good people who really, really want independence.
Yeah.
And they're just, like you said earlier on, they're like the old Labour that thought voting Labour would bring them socialism. It just isn't going to happen. And do we really have 50 years like we waited for Labour supporters to move over to the SNP? We don't have that time. People are now dying without seeing their dream of independence. We've got to get independence as quickly as possible. But you're right, the convention is the only way forward. We have to bring everyone together and fight this together, whether that is using civil disobedience or other means. I mean, we have to look through history. Every successful movement has broken the law. We shouldn't be frightened about breaking unjust laws. And if that means having illegal referendums, because let's face it, local government could have referendums. We did it in Strathclyde in the 90s over water privatisation, and we stopped water privatisation further. So it can be done. And people have got to really understand the voting systems in this country. They were conned in the Scottish Parliament elections about the supermajority. We're now showing that the supermajority could have worked now, and we could have had the independence referendum tomorrow if we had the supermajority. Mm-hmm. The local government elections, the SNP, no other party. That left so many seats available for the unionists just to walk into, and so many administrations. We could have had referendums through local government if we controlled the administrations. So people have really got to waken up and look at facts and not just blindly follow the party that they've been a member for so long. We had that with Labour. We can't afford to wait 50 years now.
No, Alan's right. Yvonne, and I take no pleasure in it. I don't think anyone in the new media, independence media, takes pleasure in it. But we have forecast everything from there won't be a referendum, that Alex Salmond was getting stitched up, that it was a conspiracy, that the GRR was a load of nonsense and would split the movement. We've told we told everyone, and along the way, we've been the ones that have been attacked. Meanwhile, when Miss Sturgeon had her press conferences for COVID, she invited the unionist media who have lied to them their whole life and excluded the pro-independence media. Not one of us was allowed in there to represent that side of it. But she still stands with them. She takes in a guy who wrote the vow. When are the people going to realise that they're being conned, that the truth is not being told to them? Those outlets that are telling them that they're too weak, too pure, too stupid, and it can't happen, are not on their side.
Well, I think that some of the politicians that sit there in Holyrood, in her own party, are quite a treacherous lot. And we saw the way that they turned on the previous First Minister. And I think that she will be a victim of the treachery, of that same sort of treachery. And I think it's only weeks away. You know, I said that the MPs down in Westminster they hate each other. You can see it just in the body language. But they're becoming more and more distant from the shenanigans in Holyrood. And I think that this is a party that is divided, and parties that are divided to that extent collapse. You know, she will be betrayed. It's only a matter of time. And the tragedy in all of this is I don't think that very many people will be sorry for her when she looks round for support, because she has frittered away so much goodwill among the ordinary members. And I don't think she understands just how hurt and deceived that they feel. I mean, the J.K. Rowling just put out a tweet earlier today saying that the biggest single assault on the rights of Scottish women and girls in her lifetime, and opposed by 2/3 of voters. Obviously, she's referring to the Gender Reform Act that Sturgeon's trying to push through. And she's saying that this is going to be Sturgeon's poll tax moment. And I think that she's right. And I think that the politicians in Holyrood who surround her are looking very, very uncomfortable. I mean, I've always been quite a fan of Humza Yousaf. You know, he's always been very upbeat, a very slick operator. And I was watching First Minister's questions the on Friday, and I was watching him, and he was slumped, sitting there, looking thoroughly miserable and troubled. And he's, normally one of the more ebullient, upbeat of the party members, but he just looked totally washed out and rinsed. Just looking at, and you look at the body language, and they're hunched. They don't want to be there. They're being paid. I don't know how much they're paid in Holyrood, but they're on comparatively big money compared to most of the people who voted them into power. And they're sitting there and they don't want to be there. They obviously don't like the job that they're doing. We've already seen a rebellion over the GRA, the biggest rebellion in the SNP's history. Nothing like that ever happened under Allan Petrie.
No, it's never happened in SNP history. I don't even think in a council.
No, well, and it's starting to implode.
Well, I hope so.
Members that I feel sorry for.
I hope it is.
In relation to the First Minister's abilities and what she has or has not delivered, I agree completely with Yvonne and J.K. Rowling, obviously, that the Gender Recognition Reform Bill will undoubtedly be Nicola Sturgeon's downfall. It will be her poll tax moment. And that's a terribly sad indictment on one who should have been doing so much more for Scotland and for Scotland's women. Look at the legacy that she was left from Alex Salmond. And, there was a point in time where women of Scotland looked up to Nicola Sturgeon. They believed that she was really such a wonderful icon for women in politics and for Scotland and for women generally. We spoke about the glass ceiling. We spoke about 50-50 representation. We spoke about sexual equality. We spoke about getting rid of sex discrimination and a whole load of stuff that was all really good and optimistic, and Scotland was going to be the best wee country in the world for women and girls. And what have we got instead? The statistics on violence against women and girls in Scotland are an utter disgrace. You can Google till the cows come home, and all you will see is that prosecutions are delayed and they're flawed, and women are disincentivized from reporting assaults upon themselves. They are now self-excluding from the support that they need, because they know that there are refuges and support services where they will be tended to by men. So we're in a set of circumstances here where the woman who was gifted on a plate the potential to take this country forwards has, in effect, done a wee tribute to a Greek wedding, because those plates have been shattered on the floor and she's dancing on our broken dreams. Yeah. So I would suggest that the best thing that Miss Sturgeon can do for the women of Scotland is to sit down and write her own resignation, and do it in such a fashion and so timely that what she can do is create an early Holyrood election, which can be the plebiscite. Now, I see Angus Brendan McNeill has been tweeting tonight about how does Scotland proceed towards independence, what might SNP members vote for at their special conference next year. And he gives, I think, 3 potential answers. But the favoured one thus far, I think that it's got something like 64% support so far, is that there'd be an early Holyrood election. And the way to achieve that is simply that, as I've said, Nicola just resigns. Because there is nobody else who's going to be able to be appointed in her place. And anybody from the SNP or Greens who was just has to stand down, and there has to be an election if there's no First Minister for a period of 28 days. That's what we need. We need action. We need Miss Sturgeon to have the courage of her convictions and to prove to the people of Scotland that her priority is actually Scottish independence. Because what has not happened, it has come to my notice, Nicola. What has not happened in the last few years, and forget the excuses about the pandemic. What's not happened is poverty has not been appropriately addressed. The Scottish Government have quietly altered their targets in relation to poverty so that they no longer seek to eradicate poverty. They just want to lower the numbers a bit. So we've got issues in relation to poverty. We've got serious issues in education. There are problems in the NHS, and we know there are massive difficulties in terms of cost of living, energy crisis, and all the related matters. None of these, not one single aspect of these, nothing in Scottish life can excel or progress or succeed or improve, and there can be no betterment for any process in Scotland or any aspect of Scottish life while we remain thrilled to Westminster. Independence is the only way forward for the country, and it is what Sturgeon has got to prioritise for once and for all. If she continues to fail to do that, we'll be stamping on her legacy, and it is others who will have to come after her who will clear up the mess that she at the moment appears to either willfully or neglectfully have created.
It's Allan, the fact we've been sitting here, not just tonight, but for a long time, bemoaning that there's been no effort put into independence, there's been no campaigning, there's been no civil servants really working on it, there's been nothing done in it. The fact of the matter is, whether a lot of people want to admit it within the SNP, the priority was switched from independence to gender issues. That's just the reality. And we find ourselves in a bit of a mess. And in the coming week, this vote comes up, which could split it asunder. But that is the reality. Independence is not at the top of Nicola Sturgeon's SNP's list of priorities. It is gender issues. Am I right?
Yeah, totally right. I mean, there you had last Wednesday, Flynn lost his debate, and 24 hours later, the white flag was held up over Bute House. Next week, the rainbow flag will then be held up over Bute House. It is ridiculous. I mean, we'll have a Scottish court, Scottish judges who think they can change the laws of nature. It is an impossibility. Trans women will never, ever be women. And women should not be forced to have care or their space disrupted by a man. It is just ludicrous that this is actually happening. I mean, we had a film that was being banned from a university with a man threatening old age pensioners. Well, I have to be quite clear. If I had been there, he'd have been transitioned very quickly, and he would have been used as earrings for him. Because these people must be brought down. We cannot allow them to bully women. There used to be a campaign that Nicola Sturgeon was so passionate about, and it was no means no. Well, women are saying no. Listen, Nicola.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, all the opinion polls are telling that 2/3 of Scots are opposed to this, but they're not being listened to. But now that you've introduced the film Adult Human Females, let me just interject here, if I may, for a second or two. Like the rest of us people in Prism, I was disgusted at what happened at Edinburgh University and how that was stopped from showing. I've been in touch and spoken with the filmmakers, and I'm delighted to say that on Monday, on our platforms here on Prism, that Adult Human Female will go out first thing on Monday morning across all our platforms. And it will be shown, and I will not, and we will not be bullied in any way, shape or form not to show that. Also, I am interviewing on a one-to-one with Deirdre and Wayne, who are the filmmakers. I'm having an interview with them, and that will go out as a midweek special, and we'll discuss the film. So what I would say to you all is watch that film on Monday, folks. If you've got any questions you want to ask the filmmakers or anything in general about this situation, please get in touch with me over Monday, because on Tuesday evening I am recording that interview, and we will put that out midweek, because on this show we have and we will continue always to support the ladies and the women's rights. We're all sons of mothers. We've all got, wives, girlfriends, daughters, granddaughters. So we're all in this fight. I'm speaking to the gentleman now. Men, we've got to get in the fight, any or not, thinking this is a women's issue. No, it's not. It's everyone's issue. The societal damage that could be done by this lunacy, this idiocy, is just catastrophic thinking about it. I mean, I put out when I said it, in 100 years' time, if an archaeologist comes up and digs you up, he will know you're either male or female. He will not know you're a trans woman. That's not what he's going to say. It's just, we've got to fight it. And on that topic, Yvonne, again, it's indicative of how terrible things have gone that J.K. Rowling, doffing hat to her, has opened Beera's Place so that women who are tragically have any kind of sexual trauma can at least go to a place now that is going to be, they will be looked after by women, they will be counselled by women, they will be examined by women, as it should be. But isn't it terrible that it's taken a philanthropist and a decent woman to fund something like this because of the government policies?
I think what is even more terrible is the tsunami of protests that followed J.K. Rowling's decision to fund. I mean, imagine somebody being criticised for funding a woman's safe space that is going to help the most, some of the most vulnerable women in our society. And she's being criticised for it. The whole world is just going upside down. And I see that Greta Thunberg, the climate child who has tried to raise our consciousness about the dangers of climate change, she has sent a message of support to those Edinburgh students who blocked the screening of the film that you're going to show. And I just think, Greta, pet, you've got it wrong this time. Stay out of this argument. And somebody who is also echoing those sentiments is Joanna Cherry. Now, Joanna Cherry, as we all know, she's quite a courageous politician, a woman who says what she means and means what she says. And she has been hypercritical of the SNP's policy over the Gender Reform Act. And I really am beginning to question how Joanna can square it with her conscience to remain in the SNP. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I'm probably doing the equivalent of criticizing Mother Teresa, because, we all love Joanna. She's, as I say, she says what she means and she means what she says. But I just think, no, you can't sit on the bench, on the benches with those surrounded by those horrible other SNP politicians around you and just think it's okay. I couldn't do it. I would just say, I'm out of here. And, I think that she's a wonderful politician, but I think it's time for Joanna to show a little bit of backbone and stick two fingers up to the SNP leadership and just say, you're making my life untenable. I mean, she is.
I think you're right. I think she could win as an independent. I think if she stood as an independent MP, she would win. But that's her choice. That's her choice. You're right. It's I can't fathom that one out either. I find it very difficult to understand how, after everything that's going on, that she can sit with them. I don't know.
I mean, she is leadership material. If we're looking for a replacement,
that's another argument for another day, I think.
But whether she would get the support or not, I mean, they did some really dirty tricks to try and maneuver and get her out of the position that she holds, and she does so well. But it's a mystery to me why she's still there under the SNP banner.
I've got to say, in any SNP leadership contest, this programme will be supporting Mr. Philip Boswell for leader. I cannot think of anyone finer than Mr. Boswell to lead the SNP. I would even rejoin. I would just for the laughs.
Yeah, angry Phil.
Would be good. It'd be a good clean out with him.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. Eva, in your professional life, you have a lot to do with women's issues and women's aid, etc. This must all be quite traumatic for you that's going on.
I find this really quite horrific, Roddy, and I think it's always helpful to put some matters like this into a historical context. When I watched the events at Edinburgh University develop, I was really quite broken-hearted because Edinburgh is the university where I got my degree. It had an international reputation which was second to none. To think that young whippersnappers in their teenage years thought that it was funny or appropriate to silence women and to prevent the screening of that film and to spit and to behave in such a dreadful manner and to get away with it is anathema to me. However, I started work in 1980, part-time working for a lawyer while I was also at uni. And my political hero at that time was George Reid. And one of the jobs that he had done prior to losing his seat was to try to introduce legislation to protect the women who in those days we called battered wives. And he's worth searching for in Hansard to see what he says and why he says it. But he talks about Scots women who found themselves trapped in situations of appalling misery, subjected to regular beatings, to assaults on their children, to molestation at home or at work. And in those days, there was nothing that women could do by way of solace or protection because they had no legal rights to their home, for example. So he had introduced a bill where he was trying to give women rights to have their property transferred to them and to have their men excluded were they violent. Eventually, though, that bill was reintroduced by others and it became the Matrimonial Homes Family Protection Scotland Act 1981. Now, I left university in 1985 and when I started work properly in Clackmannanshire then, I was the only woman attending court, and that meant that I got really all the referrals from the Women's Aid Organisation, who up until then had referred their clients onto the male solicitors who worked locally. So you can imagine that in the mid-1980s in Clackmannanshire, the referrals I got from Women's Aid at times were utterly blood-curdling. The women who were in the refuge in Clackmannanshire came there from all over the British Isles because nobody in the rest of the UK knew where Clackmannanshire was, and if women needed or wanted to hide, Clackmannanshire was the ideal place to do it. So I met women who had been beaten and battered and bruised and tortured and tormented to hell and back. And it's the knowledge that I learned then that will never leave me that has led to me being pretty outspoken in relation to gender reform, because those women that I met do not require to be further traumatised by seeing males either as clients within refuge or as advisors unexpectedly within the services where they seek support. Now, for the likes of those young folk who thought that it was smart to prevent that film being shown, I would have a question, which is this. When do people think that it became illegal in Scotland for a man, a husband, to rape his wife? Do you know when that was? 1989. It's not that long ago. And the conduct that we are seeing nowadays, with these youngsters behaving so badly towards women who seek only to defend their own rights, is a throwback to a generation and a time that people like me thought we had left behind once and for all. Now, the women of Scotland will not be bullied into submission. If this law passes, then those who vote for it, each of them as individuals, should be required to be accountable, and they should explain why they're voting for it and what they think it achieves. We know from an interview of Fulton McGregor of the SNP this very week that he doesn't understand what it's about, and there's parts of it he doesn't agree with. So I would suggest that Fulton McGregor reads the bill, and he reads, for example, the CAS report, and he reads the testimony which was on Wings Over Scotland today from 2 disabled women about what life will be like for them in the event that men continue to be allowed to self-identify as women, especially in the field of personal care. Now, it's no secret that I'm disabled. Can you imagine what it would feel like to be me lying in a hospital bed with one leg when my false leg is at the other end of the room, and to look across the room and see that behind a curtain is a man who's pretending to be a woman, and I know that he's watching me because he's a predator. These are the real life effects of allowing self-identification. It will undoubtedly be used by predators in all their nefarious ways. And the very fact that the SNP Green government refuses to acknowledge that fact says it all about the priorities of the first feminist.
It does indeed. Allan, you know, Eve was talking there about these young men being so violent and aggressive towards women and spitting at women. What must their mothers say? Did their mothers know? I know that if I ever, my mother, God rest her, still miss her and love her, if I dreamt about answering my mother back, I'd get up in the morning and apologised. Is society so broken down that these people think this kind of behaviour is acceptable?
That's one of the biggest problems we've got, Roddy, is these are the people who have never heard the word, no, you cannot do that. Because it's a lot easier for a parent nowadays just to let their child do whatever they want. Or a lot of times when you discipline your child, the government come down on you like a ton of bricks and you've got social work at your door or the police at your door. It's time to bring back some discipline into this society, because we're creating animals just now. But I think a lot of this has got to do with money as well. I mean, you've got J.K. Rowling putting her own money where her mouth is to defend the rights of women. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you've got the Scottish government threatening to remove money from voluntary organisations if they don't accept this woke policy.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. And these organisations have really got to take the stance of saying, well, do you know what? We're not accepting your policies. Remove the money and we'll see what the public has to say about this at the next election. Now, 3 years ago, Shona Robson helped the group that I run, Carers Group, to reopen beds, because we were cut down to 2 beds when it should have been 4. She had a fundraiser, a little coffee morning, and raised £314.11 for us. On Wednesday, during the debate, myself and a few parents are going up to our office and we are delivering that money back, because we don't want money from someone who is endangering our children's lives. Because our children are in specialist units just now and they go into a children's ward and we're able to stay the night with them. When they go to adult services, we can't stay the night. They don't have the defence of a parent or a carer beside them. And if there is a predator pretending to be a woman, they're extremely vulnerable. No. And I'm sick and tired of Nicola Sturgeon, Shona Robson denying this is a possibility. But I also think their bank accounts should be looked at very closely and their investments should be looked at closely, including the sheriff, the Lord who made the decision that a bit of paper could change your sex. They want to know if they're invested within the pharmaceutical industries who are funding this whole project.
Or whether they're called Sandra at the weekend. That's another possibility. I'm glad I'm not in Scotland. I could get huckled tomorrow. Moving on, it's somewhat, Yvonne, because all these things we're talking about it's the daily lives of people that are going to get affected. And one of the biggest things at the moment is austerity and inflation. And I noticed there was a headline that really got me in Channel 4 this week. They said, inflation is easing to 10.7%. It's horrific. But then, by the same token, they then turn around and say, the unions, the rail workers, are holding the country to ransom for a 10% pay rise. They're still taking a cut. They're still taking a pay cut. If inflation's running at 10.7, doesn't take a genius to work out, and you're only getting 10%, you're still losing wages. But it's the language that's used by our media who collude with the elite that, inflation's fine, don't worry about it, it's only 10.7, wages 10 point, greedy bastards, you're asking for too much.
Because the media is made up of privileged, white,
schoolboys,
entitled elite.
Yeah.
And that, they have no understanding of what it is to be in need, to be poor, to be starving, where mothers are giving up their meals so that their children can eat. These people have never been within half a mile of a council house or an angry person, or have any recognition of suffering and hardship. And it was when Andrew Neil was editor of the Sunday Times, he said that he wanted to get more working class people with real lived experiences into the newsrooms. And he may have for a while, but when I worked at the Sunday Times, one of the jobs I did was going out to speak to ordinary people on behalf of the specialists, because they couldn't engage with the man in the street. They had no idea how to open up a conversation, how to show any empathy, or, it's so frustrating. And one of the other things that I do is listen to Radio 4 on a Morning the Today programme.
You need to get out of there, Yvonne. You really do.
And, if you want to listen to self-entitled, privileged elite, that's the station to do it. And it's they actually had Darren McGarvey on the other day giving one of the Wreath lectures on poverty, and I was so pleased to hear it. And he's so clever. He's been through the mill, he's suffered, he's lived with poverty, he's seen it in action. And he said, can anyone tell me, all these people who are running the country today, all from private schools, Eton, Harrow, who are making decisions, why are they making such a hash of things? How is it that, Liz Truss, gosh, look at the damage she did in 2 or 3 weeks. We lost the Queen, the economy crashed, we'll still be talking about Trussonomics 20, 30 years down the line.
Yeah. But the problem is, surely, the problem is that the UK in general, the whole UK, is still a class-conscious society. And because someone has a posh voice, people say, well, he's got a posh voice, he went to a posh school, he must be smarter than me, so if he says it, it must be true. That's the problem. Am I right?
Absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. It's nothing to do with skin colour, culture, nationality. It's everything to do with class and an accent, and you're automatically judged. You know, just by saying a few words, you're automatically judged. It's class and it's the establishment. And one of the biggest examples that's right in everybody's face and they just can't see it, and is what happened to Meghan Markle. You know, she's a Black American actress. And the contempt that was shown to her. Now, if a Black person tells me that they have been a victim of racism, I tend to believe it because they're coming from a point of knowledge. And when she walked in to Britain's most dysfunctional family.
Well, you haven't met my family yet. You haven't met my family.
You know, she was met with racism, elitism, the establishment at its worst. And the worst offenders aren't actually the royal family. The worst offenders are their support system, their SPADs, and their advisors. And it's the whole country, the whole class system is absolutely rotten.
Yep. It's got to be said, Eva, as well, that we're coming to the end of our time. Techie's just sent me the message. You've all seen there. But let's be honest, Rishi Sunak was second choice. The reason Liz Truss, the loony, got the job, who cost us $65 billion in a couple of weeks, is because he was not white. Now, they can dance round it as much as they like. It was racism that stopped him getting the job the first time. Am I right, Frank, or am I doing it again?
No, I think you're spot on, Roddy, but I don't think that we'd be doing ourselves any favours in Scotland if we tried to pretend that Scotland was actually any different. You know, there's racism and classism in Scotland, and it's horrible. Yeah. I know that particularly. I actually find it quite amusing that it's a very small example in the great scheme of things, but because I live and work in Clackmannanshire, I regularly have correspondence with solicitors from Glasgow and Edinburgh who clearly talk down to me because they think, well, she talks with a funny accent and she lives and works in a place we've never heard of, therefore she must be a thicko. There's just that thing about, you know, the elite within Scotland as well as the UK. The other issue, which you know is dear to my heart and also to yours in Scotland, is we continue to have very major problems in relation to the Gypsy Roma traveller community, and the discrimination that they suffer and have suffered is utterly unconscionable. The Scottish Government should be apologising to them, and they're not doing it yet. They're going to have some sort of investigation, but they've not yet got around to admitting defeat or fault. And that kind of stuff actually embarrasses me because Scotland was supposed to be better than that.
Yep. But that's another programme we're trying to put together, and we will. Ladies and gentlemen, the clock is beating us as per usual. Ladies, gentlemen, I have to thank you for your participation tonight, and for you all watching, thank you. And until we see you again, you and yours, please take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.